Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bone. Today we have Fuchs, and we are going to talk about retirement planning. And the big question is, do athletic trainers need more compensation, or are we all just really bad at managing our money?
Well, with that kind of a question, I mean, the reality is your biggest wealth building asset or tool is your income. So you need to make sure that you're being compensated at a value based on your experience. And yeah, there are some areas in the profession where, maybe that compensation is a little low for your background, training, and experience and should be higher. But in general, with proper planning, proper budgeting, you can start to make headway. But there's two sides of the equation, right? There's income and then there's expenses.
Definitely.
And so we either need to lower expenses by controlling our budget, or if doing all that still doesn't get us the freed up money to invest and save for our future, then maybe income does need to come up.
Of course. Well, I have Dr. Fuchs on today because he was one of my instructors in the DAT program at FIU. And we were working on money management this past semester. And I thought it was very important because it was very insightful and got me thinking about how better I can maximize my money and, work on savings. So we don't get this in our education because we're usually going from kinesiology to athletic training. And, we never really get to talk about the figures that we're bringing in. So today I wanted to talk about retirement planning because we don't have crystal balls, but we can at least try to plan our future much better than what a crystal ball could give us sometimes.
I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah. So, after doing the course this semester, obviously I kind of know the answer to some of these questions, and this is just general advice. We're not, telling anybody how to go out and live their life, but just some things to think about today. I think that was the caveat you gave me, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is, and everybody's situation is going to be specific, and ultimately they need to develop a team like we talked about in the class of having their own financial advisor, having an accountant and things to run their specific situations. But we're going to talk about general broad strokes of basic steps that you can start to get to that point.
Definitely. So when is the best time for people to start seriously planning about retirement?
Well, the reality is the sooner you start planning and the sooner you start taking action, the better. But you have to start from where you're at. You can't beat yourself up if you've just gone out and bought that brand new, nice, shiny car, or gotten something else on your credit cards or other things that you've created debt. You've got to start from where you're at. So you got to give yourself a little bit of grace, and you got to start now. Obviously, the sooner you start putting away money because of compounding interest, the better that is. But first, you have to get control of your biggest wealth building asset, your income, by doing a budget. So you have money and see what money you do have to be able to put away. So starting now and starting with doing and learning how to do a real basic and a budget that you do every single month consistently is where you need to start. Because if you don't know what disposable income you have and it's just going wherever, you can't save with it. So you got to start now, and you got to start with the basics of identifying what expenses you do have, right? What assets you do have, and then what liabilities or expenses do you have, through a budget process to figure out where you're going to go. So the sooner you start, the better.
So when somebody starts looking at their budget, should they take maybe the last couple months, or should they start fresh with the new month and get an idea of what they're spending on, would you say?
Yeah. When I work with couples, clients, or others on budgeting, we usually tell them you need to write down what you are spending currently for the existing month, right? What are your known bills? Most people really don't know what that month looks like on paper, because they have it in their mind that it's this. But let's start by writing down what it is that you're spending for that month. And we start with that month. Because in reality, good budgeting is you budget based on the upcoming month, because there's no perfect month. The idea of some people will try budgeting from let's just take our money and divide it out by 12 months, and it'll be fine because we spend evenly. But the reality is you have certain birthdays, you have certain holidays, certain gifts, you travel, vacation in certain months, and those change. But when I'm starting, we're going to start with a current month, preferably like it's now, the second day of this month, and I've already done my budget for the month of May. You ideally want to do the written budget and have it laid out before the month starts so that you have a spending plan for that month.
Yeah.
So start with the month that you're in, get that information, and start building some habits, because it's 80% behavior, it's 20% knowledge. And I say that all the time, and others who are on the radio, from Dave Ramsey to other financial counselors, will say it. But the way I sum it up with my own students is, at our university, we have this PAL corner. That's where all the activity and stuff on campus goes on. And if I took a camera and a mic and I went down to that corner and I asked everybody walking by, should you save money? Everybody will tell me yes. But if I flip that question and say, how much money are you saving a month? Changes, right? So, but we've got to start with where we're at, and we would start with the month present.
Yeah. And would you say concentrate on that month, or would you kind of have an outlook of the year too, of certain trips coming up or events, or would you concentrate on the small part first?
When you're first starting, you've got to get a month and understand what it's like. After you get a couple of months and that becomes habit forming, if you will, it usually takes 3 or 4 months of budgeting before your budget actually reflects, what you're doing. So you have to give yourself grace when you build it, because you're going to have a whole bunch of corrections during that month because you don't really know how you spend your money. You think you do, but you don't. And I think maybe you experienced that through the course and having to do it. But after about 3 or 4 months, yes, we do start talking to people about planning expenses that they know are coming. So if you pay your car insurance every 6 months, some people do that, right? And some people go, oh, it's July, I got this huge car insurance payment, because they didn't plan for it. And planning for those types of expenses that you know are coming is called a sinking fund. But basically, in your budget, each month, you know what that bill is. So if it's a 6 months bill, and for easy math, if it's $600 that's going to come due in 6 months, you put aside in your budget $100 a month that's going into your savings. But your savings account, while it may look like it has a lot of money in it, we have a separate spreadsheet that has what the money is allocated for. In that, when you look at the savings account, it says $9,000. Well, 600 of that is for the insurance expense. Several thousand is for a trip coming up or whatever it is, but you can keep track of what that money is allocated for. But you set aside so that when July comes, if it's 6 months, or June, if we're doing 6 months, comes, you'll have $600 to make that payment, not freak out. So you do start planning strategically for payments that you know you have coming that are larger.
Okay. Yeah, those treat yourself moments add up very quickly, and they don't get on the bottom line very often.
Correct.
Okay, so these are kind of the first steps to start planning for retirement. That's why we're kind of going through them. So, so getting a hold of your budget and having an idea of where your money is going. And then I think we just got done with the class, but then kind of the next step is addressing any debts you have. Is that correct?
That would be correct. Well, let's back up. The most important thing is you also need to get an emergency fund.
Oh,
right?
yes.
You talk to any financial planner, they're going to tell you need to have an emergency fund. You need to have 3 to 6 months of expenses, and expenses are not income. It's 3 to 6 months of expenses. But in order to know what those expenses are, you've got to know what you spend each month.
Yes.
And the idea is you save up an emergency fund so that when life does happen, you have money that you can dip into that's cash to cover it versus going back into debt. So when the washer and dryer conk out and you have to buy new ones, you still have debt, you have something to pay cash for that versus going back into debt. So we need the emergency fund in place because it's the buffer, right? And then getting out of debt is extremely important because I started this off with your single biggest wealth building asset is your income. And so it's investing in yourself and your income, right? But if I have a lot of debt, so if I have a car payment, I have credit card payments, I have, these medical bills, I have all these things, that's money going out to somebody else, and less income for me to do anything with. So we want to pay those debts off as quickly as possible. And get out of debt, get everything out of debt that you can, because then that frees up the rest to invest, save for some of those sinking funds and things. And for people who may already have a house or something like that, you may have to save up because in 10, 15 years, you're going to need a new roof. You're going to need to replace certain things, right? And you want to be able to save for those, as well as put money away for retirement. So we do need to pay down our debt. Got to get that under control, because otherwise we're paying other people payments and we're robbing ourselves of our ability to save for retirement.
And one of the athletic training debts is school, obviously. How can they address other debts that they may have to help take some of that stress off?
I think the best way to address debts, and it's actually been researched by Harvard Business School. So the two systems you hear about, one's called the avalanche method and one's called the debt snowball, right? The avalanche method says, hey, put those with the highest interest first on your list and those with the lowest interest last, and pay them down. But they could be all different amounts, right? Student loans, depending on whether they're federally backed or private, could have very low interest rates and have large amounts to pay on them. While you may have a credit card that only has a $4,000 balance, right? But it has a very high interest rate, so it's being put up there, and things get out of order. And what the Harvard Business studied was how do people actually pay off debt, right? In the debt snowball method, the idea is smallest debt to largest debt. So whatever you have the largest amount, is down here and your smallest debt is up here. And as you pay it off, and here's the key, no more new debt, right? So as I pay off my $500 gas card, credit card, and I pay off my $1,500, department store credit card, and I'm going down, the idea is I had a $30 payment here, at a $20 payment here. I now have $50 to add, but I pay minimums on all my others. I'm not saying we're stopping payment, right?
Yeah.
We pay the minimums, but we roll over. And each time we're putting more down. And then when I get to that car payment where I'm paying, $300, $400 a month, and I'm adding $300 a payment to it pays off faster. And that's a big payment. And I keep going. And the thing is, when people do the debt snowball, according to when it's been researched, and yes, Dave Ramsey talks about it all the time, people are familiar with him, but it's been researched, like I said, by Harvard Business School, and they found that method is what is going to get the majority of people to pay it off. And what they realized is it comes down to its behavior, right? It's behavior modification. But we need to see quick wins in order to change our behavior. So those are kind of the two broad ways that are out there of attacking debt. And we want to get rid of that consumer debt as quickly as we can. Our credit cards, our car loans. You do want to get rid of your student loan debt. I know a lot of people that took advantage during the whole COVID thing and kept paying. Well, some chose not to, but they weren't charging interest and compounding it and all that, and they paid those things off fairly quickly.
Yeah.
It can be done. I know sometimes people look at their debt and they think, oh, there's large amounts. But again, there's plenty of resources out there to encourage you, to let you know that you can get done. I know, not from your class, but from another class in there, I had somebody send me a thank you email because they paid off $250,000 in student loan debt, or in total debt, in about 2.5 years. A large percentage of that was student loan debt. So it can be done regardless of income, etc. It's about controlling your budget, getting an emergency fund, and then slowly working your way out of debt. And don't continue to borrow money. The first step of getting out of debt is just stop borrowing money.
Cut up those credit cards.
Cut those credit cards up, stop using them, keep driving that vehicle. I've run into this these days. I'm shocked at how many people have a vehicle and they're like, well, things are breaking down. And I'm like, what? Like, well, I had to take it in and it had to have its brakes done and it had to have its oil changed. And what I realized is car dealerships now, when they sell a new car, have this, it comes with like the first 3 years of like general maintenance, right? You can bring it in and they do all this apparently. Well, that's general maintenance. That doesn't mean the car's breaking down. It's just now you have to pay for it because it's no longer covered and part of the deal you made. But that's a whole nother side. So there's little things that other people are doing because it's their job, right? I mean, banks, one thing people don't think of banks as for-profit companies. You go into a department store, say, I'm just looking, right? When the salesman comes to you. We don't look at banks that way, but banks sell money and they sell it by selling credit products, whether it's a credit card, a HELOC, or whatever, because they're selling you to make money by charging you interest. And most people don't look at a bank transaction that way.
Yep.
They just don't. That's a great marketing job on the bank's side.
It is. So for people that have, or that are thinking about credit cards, would you just recommend not to get a credit card? Because I know that credit score is important sometimes. But what would be your take on that?
So yeah, I have built-in bias there, and again, I'm not big on credit cards at all. Personally, and as I shared in the class, I mean, I haven't had a credit card since like 2000, and I travel internationally as well as around the country speaking as an athletic trainer, right? So people are like, oh, how do you travel? Well, you can. But I have, a debit card that I use. So avoiding credit cards and a credit score, what we have to keep in mind is if you look up myfico.com, first of all, MyFICO is a private company that has basically their own patent on these formulas that they sell to the credit score companies, Experian and the others, to run a calculation. But they say, you give us this data, we'll run a calculation, and that's your credit score. But it is not an indicator of wealth. And that's the key component. Because if you look up MyFICO score, it's how many credit cards have you had? When was your last payment? Have you ever had what type of debt have you had? Have you had car loans? Have you had a home loan? Have you had a home equity loan? So all these, how many times have you interacted with the bank and in what way, right? So the other adage is, if you won the lottery tomorrow, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million after taxes, right?
Yeah.
See these big ones, but what comes in after all the taxes? But your credit score is not going to change because when you put all that money in the bank, it's no interaction with debt or debt products, and they are products. They're trying to make money from you by selling them. Now, what they sell you on, what they've done a great marketing job is you got to have a credit score to do certain things or to get better rates on things. But you can buy a house without a credit score. It's called manual underwriting. Yes, you'll get the same interest rates, et cetera. But the key is when you go to buy that house, you should have about 20% down, 10 or 20% down. So many people are trying to buy a house with like 1%, 2% on these first time home buyers thinking this is a good deal. It's not, for a whole litany of reasons. But when you have 20% down to buy a house, when you've saved up money to put a down payment on, if that's your goal, later when we talk about goals, right? If you save that up and you do a manual underwriting because you don't have a credit score, like right now, if you run my credit score, it's indeterminate. So I don't have one when people try to run it. So it's a misnomer and people think you can and can't. And the problem is other people play their games like, but I get all these points. Well, investigate the reality of how many people are using their credit cards for points. And the reality is, for the people who tell me they pay it off, just in the last quarter of data coming from the, because I pulled it up, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York shows that with the last data of tracking consumer debt, non-housing consumer debt, so not any debt on homes, is at about $4.96 trillion. Okay. Yep. So for all these people that supposedly around me say, but I pay it all off. No, it's revolving debt and it's continued to go up, is the trend. So people say, oh, I get these points and get all this. The fact is that the people who do pay off and don't carry a balance, right? I don't carry a balance. Here's the other thing, though, that you risk. Most people who say that, they pay it off at the end of the month. That's when they pay it, right? Well, if your job went away, not because of something you did, you were in a wreck because a drunk driver hit you, and your income stopped, assuming, well, maybe talk a little bit about planning and having the right insurances, and you don't have short-term disability or other, but your income stops, and that bill comes due that you would normally pay because you're counting on that next check. Well, you're not going to get that per se. Now we have a money crisis and a personal crisis, and that's stress, and that's not good. Versus, hey, I just paid for it, I'm done. So even carrying a balance that next month creates risk, and risk is something we want to avoid when we can in finances.
Yeah, definitely a squeeze on you if you're back to back on your payments and debt.
Raise the bar in 2025. Complete your BOC certification maintenance requirements early. Don't forget that 2025 is a reporting year for athletic trainers. Are you on track to complete your BOC certification maintenance requirements? Find out today by logging into your BOC profile at bocatc.org/BOC360. That's right, it's time, and this year is the year to renew your certification maintenance requirements. Check it out at bocatc.org/BOC360.
Okay, so we got to the debt portion.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have addressed all of your debt, what would you say the next step would be after that?
I mean, after you've gotten all your debt and you've gotten your emergency fund, right, of 3 to 6 months of expenses put away, then now it's going to depend on where you're at in life, what's going on. So that's why this is broad strokes. But that's when you want to start working towards putting away 15% of your income into retirement. Okay. You want to work towards 15%. Now, at the same time, if you have a goal of, say, let's say you want to buy a house, this is a time also to start a sinking fund for house down payment, right? But if not, you want to put 15% into retirement. And then the reason we only do 15% is we want to save maybe for a house, or if we have a house, but let's say we have a family, right? Then are we going to put away for their college funding some money, right? Now, retirement takes place before college funding. Why? Because there's no scholarships for retirement. Okay.
Very true.
And if you're counting on Social Security as that scholarship for retirement, I wouldn't be
Not
putting
been
all my
paying
eggs in
attention.
one basket by any means. I'm not even sure if it's going to be there for me when I retire. And if it is great, it's gravy. But realistically, you need to build your retirement, right? Also, how many people right now have seen where their parents are trying to take care of their grandparents while raising them? There are a lot of people in this sandwich because somebody hadn't planned for their retirement. So if you do a good job and this is if you're going to have a family and you have one, plan for your retirement so you're taken care of, so you're not a burden to your kids. Also, there's multiple reasons to do that. And then after that, you also want to work towards paying off your house. Like, I don't include your house debt in your consumer debt, right? If you've purchased a home, you want to have some income out, some guidelines on how you should purchase a home, but you want to work towards paying that off too, so you're completely debt free. And then once you're completely debt free, no car payments, no house payments, nothing, then you can increase your contributions towards retirement, towards giving, because you can only do three things with money. You can save it, you can spend it, and you can give it, right? And giving can be fun when you have money to give, or gifts, buying gifts, right, for people, however way you want to do that. But those are the things that you can do. So that's kind of steps. But the really next step is start getting 15% of your income going into retirement savings.
Okay. So when you're being hired by a company, they obviously have some programs that help you accumulate some retirement. Can you talk about those options?
Well, we'll talk about it.
You can do broad strokes.
Yeah,
I know it's very complicated.
Yeah, right. It is broad strokes because the most common things or options people are going to have available to them, right? You have employer retirement, and all these retirement plans are tax favored in some way. You'll hear that term, right? And so there's a couple of terms that we need to understand. Most companies offer retirement plans through a corporate retirement plan called a 401k or a 403b.
Okay.
And where that comes from is the IRS, section 401 of the IRS code, subsection K or subsection B. And it tells a corporation how they can give or run a retirement plan for their company. So that's kind of where the alphabet soup comes from. But what all these numbers and letters that we're going to talk about are what I call codes or a fence, if you imagine a fence. And their job is to keep your money somehow warm from taxes, tax favored, so it can grow for retirement. Okay. Then within all these alphabet soups that we're going to talk about here in a second are, if it's a fence and you have a farm, you're either, if you're vegetarian, you're growing things, right? And you got to grow it, grow it, grow it. So anything inside your farm and the fence, or if you like your steak, you got to grow your cattle, right? We're going to have the things that are going to grow our money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inside those fences. So you have 401k, 403b, which are corporate. Within those, you also have something called a Roth 401k or a Roth 403b that your company may offer. All right. So then you as an individual, you separate from your company, can have your own individual, it's called an individual retirement account, IRA. It's actually not a retirement account. It's actually by the IRS an individual retirement arrangement. Your banks want you to think it's an account because you'll go get it from them when you should be working with an investment advisor because it's an individual retirement arrangement that you can have on your own that you can put a certain dollar amount up to, just like employer retirement plans, which I'll talk about in a second, have caps of how much you can totally contribute to them each year. But you have an IRA, as long as you have an earned income, you can contribute to it. But you also have the ability to open your own Roth IRA, which is an individualized Roth. And we're going to talk about the difference between these with Roth on them and without, because it plays with the order in which you should be contributing to which ones, if that makes sense, from your employer. So coming back around, the way it works is Roth is a great word because what a Roth means is when you contribute to a Roth, whether it's a 401k Roth, a 403b, or your own Roth IRA, you're putting the money in after taxes. So you pay taxes on the money and it goes into that account and it grows. And at retirement, you get to take out how much ever money you have in retirement. So if you get to $1 million or a couple $1 million, you can pull all that money out tax-free. That's huge.
Yeah.
Because I ask anyone on this podcast to tell me in 10, 20, 30 years, depending on where you are in your retirement schedule, what will the U.S. tax rate be? What do you think the U.S. government and the IRS is going to have a tax rate? Is it going to be less than it currently is? Probably not. Could it be more? Yes. So it grows tax-free. Now, if it doesn't have Roth in it, and it's just a 401k or a 403b or an individual retirement account, that money is going in after tax. So your employer, goes in pre-tax. Let me say that, not after tax. I messed that up. It goes in pre-tax. So your employer puts it in, right? And then your income is taxed, whatever you have contributing. So even though I hear some people say, well, my employer doesn't match, I have a bad employer. Well, even if your employer is not matching, the government is matching because they're not taking tax. They're letting you put that money in tax-free to grow. And so when it gets to when it grows in retirement and you go to take that money out, and even if you want to leave it there, and that's the other nice thing about a Roth, you can leave it as long as you want in retirement. the government starts forcing in 401ks, 403bs, and IRAs what are called mandatory withdrawals. And people may have heard that term because they want their tax money. And what's going to happen is when you pull it out, that money is taxed. Okay. Now, depending on how much you pull out and where you are, and that's why this is broad strokes, what tax bracket you're in or what, as you pull it as income, it puts you in is how much it's going to be taxed. But the government who's loaned you that money tax-free wants their taxes back. That's why there's mandatory withdrawals at certain ages. So, so those are your general options from most. There are a few others. If you're self-employed, I know there's some ATs out there. There are things called SEPs, which is, your own employee plan, basically. So you have options, and that's something you need to talk with an investment advisor about if you're running your own business, and an accountant about as far as which plans to look at. But for most people, here's the order. You want to do any match that you get. So if you're working towards your 15% and your company matches 3%, 5% in there, let's even say it's not in a Roth, it's just in a 401k. Well, what that means is they're going to add 3% if you give whatever dollar amount they require, which could be 3%. It could be a 1-for-1, or it could be you have to put in 5%, and we'll give you 3%. Well, that's free money, right? From the company. So you always take the match. And then if it's in a 401k or a 403b, you take the match, then you do your individualized Roth and you max it out.
Yeah.
Because Roth is going to go tax-free. This over here isn't, but we're going to take to the match. And then if what you're contributing to your Roth and what you're contributing to your employer doesn't get to 15%, then you just go back to your employer account after you max your Roth and max it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Roth trumps. Now, one thing that is important to note in all this confusing, if it's not, if your employer offers you a Roth 401k or Roth 403b and they match you, their match is not going to go in to the Roth portion. It can't. But it's going to grow in an IRA in the 401k, just like you're putting into a regular 401k, and your contributions are going into the Roth portion. So you'll see two growths, but it's still free money.
Yeah. So obviously, if it's free money, I don't feel like a lot of athletic trainers calculate that into their compensation package.
Right.
They kind of go off the hard number that they're offered. How should athletic trainers look at that? I guess I don't know how to say it.
Yeah.
I guess, but like,
so is it a value to take? Somebody gives you a $55,000 job offer with a 5% match versus somebody gives you, let's say, a $55,000 offer with no match, right?
Yeah.
And let's say it's even numbers, right? Not even differential. Which do you take? I'm not going to be as focused on that in depth, because if we were doing math in the first place, you wouldn't be in debt and you would be doing a budget, right?
Yeah.
So as subtle as that sounds, yeah, a match generally is good, but I would be more focused on, and this is where it gets individualized. That's why somebody needs to work with an individual financial planner, coach, somebody on their budget. Because do I have a lot of debt? And so let's say that those offers at 65,000, and I'm going to have more take-home income to knock that down, so I will be freed up sooner. That may be more advantageous than any match, because I'm not going to be able to get to that match, right? And some people will be like, well, they're offering me a match, I got to take that. Well, if you have a lot of debt, again, this is where I work with clients individually, it still may be better for you to not be contributing to that retirement yet until we get this debt way down, and then let's maximize it.
Okay.
So those are factors that individually you have to sit down and look at. Now, if you can find higher matches of 12, 15%, but here's the thing, a match can be changed any year. That's why I'm not going to focus on that as much as a benefit, because 12%, and then next year it could be 3, and next year it could be none with the company. So
Okay.
the one other type of retirement that we have to touch on real quick is pensions, right?
Yeah.
So you have pension plans, which are pretty much non-existent in the corporate world anymore. Because what people have to understand is a pension is an asset of the company. So if I worked for XYZ Airplane Incorporated, right, as an employee, and that company declared bankruptcy, like one major airline did several years ago, the federal bankruptcy court is going to decide if they need to lower the pension payments. So people who are already retired saw 50% cuts in their payment that they were getting from the pension because it's an asset of the company, and that can happen.
And it has to be an active company to pay it.
Right. So, but in the world of athletic training, because a lot of us work in municipalities and state institutions, whether it's public schools, whether it's colleges, universities that are state owned, a lot of states offer state retirement systems, which are pensions. Okay. States sometimes go broke. I was in California as a grad student back in the 90s, and California went broke. It's done it several times, and I got IOUs from the state. That's not a great feeling. But that being said, just be aware that pensions are rare and they do exist, but a lot of state schools offer you an option of like a 401k or 403b type retirement through TIAA-CREF or through all these other companies that offer their products, right? So the reality is the average person today is going to have 7 to 10 jobs before they graduate, right?
Yeah.
A pension plan was designed, you're going to go work there and you're going to be there for 20, 30 years, right? And at the end, you're going to get this pension payout. I would ask the viewers, especially the younger ones, even ones that are, in their 30s, how many times are you planning to take a new job, right? Or change jobs? If you have a 401k or 403b, that is portable.
Yeah.
Okay. Your individuals are yours, and the 401, the 401k, 403b, you can take with you. Okay. If you leave one state and go to another state job somewhere else, sometimes those pensions don't align correctly. And it's not as easy to just say, oh, I've got this or that. So it's usually better if you're in control and it's not an asset of somebody else, which leads to the last part. If you leave a company, so you're working for XYZ Hospital Outreach, right? And you have a pension and you've been there 5, 10, or not a pension. You have a 401k or 403b, and you have money in that you've been putting in for the last 5, 10 years. And you go work for, let's say you're going to go work in physician practice, right? What the conventional wisdom that people say is, oh, just roll your 401k from there to their 401k to the new company, right? This is where you need to work with the good financial advisor and planner, because we know that you really shouldn't do that.
Okay.
What you should do is roll your 401k into, if you don't already have your own IRA set up, individual, you want to roll it into that. Okay. Not into the next company. And everybody goes, well, why? It's just easier. Here's why. Remember back when I said the IRS set up a regulation and a code for an employer to operate a retirement plan? When you go and look at those retirement plans, they usually have a bunch of funds, right? S&P index funds, Vanguard, all these different funds. But they have 30 or 40 funds that you get to choose from, correct? And working with your own financial planner, they can tell you which funds to choose from that plan. But here's the thing, any corporate plan, 401k or 403b, is limited to only having so many funds in there. If you leave your company and go to a new one and you roll that into your IRA, your individual retirement account, then you can choose from the 1.5 million funds that are out there. Because some people are like, well, why so-and-so's doing their 401k does better than so-and-so's, and they're different companies. Sometimes it's just about what funds and fund choices are available. So, but that's where we've got to start getting some basic education and understanding these things, that it is actually better to roll out. Now, you don't want to take it cash, FYI, because there's all kinds of taxes and penalties. You want to do what's called a direct transfer, which working with an actual advisor or somebody, they can get you the paperwork and it goes. But that's where people are like, oh, I'm going to this company, and that company person will say, yeah, you can just roll it into ours. Well, that's great for whoever is running and managing their fund, because they're getting a whole bunch of money into their fund. But it's not necessarily as good for you from the ability to grow. So we definitely want to. And by the way, you've also been deemed to leave your company if your company has a merger. That actually triggers retirement plan and other stuff. And most people say, oh, just roll it into the new one. No, that's a great time to move it out and grow opportunity.
Now, more than ever, athletic trainers are becoming inundated with the growing volumes and sources of data surrounding clinical injury management. In fact, the purpose of data has changed. Whether it's pre-participation examinations, electronic medical records, concussion management, nutrition, or wearable devices, athletic trainers are constantly faced with new and complicated challenges interpreting data to drive patient care outcomes, reduce injury rates, and show practitioner value. To get ahead of this change, athletic training departments turn to Preventix, a data analytics solution provider. With over 25 years of athletic training and clinical data experience, Preventix empowers athletic training and sports medicine organizations with tools necessary to quantify the impact of care interventions on patient success and outcomes. As a trusted partner, Preventix works with you to build a strategy that addresses your specific pain points, integrating all your data sources, providing clean, reliable data, dashboards, and metrics that can be immediately accessed by stakeholders at the point of care. Don't let messy, siloed data continue to negatively impact your care delivery initiatives and practitioner value. Unlock the power of your clinical data today. Visit Preventix.com for more information. Preventix.com. Yeah. So complicated.
It is and it isn't. And I guess the last thing we'll mention, because this changes year to year, but you have max. Remember, we said we want to get to 15% of your income. Okay. And so if you're doing your own individual IRA or a Roth IRA in 2025, the maximum you can put in one of those is $7,000. Okay. So if you run that number, if you use $50 a month, you're getting to 6,000, right? 5 times 12, 6, right? Or $500 a month, I meant, gets you to 6,000, right? So that's how much you can contribute in there. Now, if you're doing a Roth for your for companies, Roth 403b or 401k, I believe I always forget I think the catch up is like, if you're 50 years or older, you can add an extra 5,000. I think they're at around 20,000, but you can easily Google what the maximum contribution is for a for a 401k in 2025, which I'm trying to do on the fly here because, it's 23,500 is the max you can contribute. So what's your income? What's 15% of it? Sometimes 15% isn't going to get you to the max contribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you max out, then you max out, right?
Yeah.
So
Doesn't hurt anybody.
no.
So obviously we have a range of aged athletic trainers. So for some that are maybe just thinking about it and they're on maybe the second half of their career, is there any way that they can really catch up, or do they really need to get those first steps established first?
The only way you're going to catch up is to free up income. And the way you free up income is to do those first steps.
Okay.
As much as people sit there, because everybody knows they should be saving money, and I want to put a bunch of money, but if I put a bunch of money away, how many of you in your mid-year have heard about somebody saying, oh, I took a 401k loan, which is definitely not a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or I took money out of my Roth because, yes, technically the contributions you put into a Roth, you can take out tax-free and penalty-free, not the growth, but whatever you contributed, but you're unplugging this investment. And investing is putting money away for 5 years or longer to grow it because we need it for retirement. And, you need to be able to contribute consistently in order to grow it. So you've got to do these basic steps. Stop getting into debt, get out of debt, free up that income, and start doing it. Now, yes, the older you are, the you need to really start focusing on this, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to take some growing.
Yeah. So federal retirement age is 65. Is that correct? Ish?
Yes. In broad strokes, yes. That's a good guideline. 65, 67, Social Security, things like that.
Yeah, you're eligible for Social Security.
You're eligible for certain things.
So for people that may want to retire earlier, how do they just pick an age and say they're done, or how is the best way to plan the retirement? What number should make somebody happy, I guess?
Well, and you hit on it. Retirement is not an age, it's a number.
Okay.
And then what you have to figure out is, what do I want my lifestyle to actually be when I'm retired, right? What expenses is that going to generate? And will I have enough from my investments as I pull them out based on what they grow in my investment accounts to sustain that? And that is when you know you can retire. And everybody, and this is why we said broad strokes, right? You have to sit down, and if you're married or have a significant other, a partner, you have to have those shared common goals and have those discussions, right? If you're an individual, you still have to make realistic what you want that to look like, right? Do I want to be able to travel the world in retirement? And what's that expense look like? Hotels, flight, right? Or am I getting an Airstream and that's how I'm traveling the US? And everybody's dreams and goals are different. And that's where having a financial planner can help. But you need to start thinking of it as a number and not necessarily an age, right?
Okay.
If I get enough money, I can do that. Now, like Social Security has certain amounts that you're going to get if you take it at age 65 versus at age 70 versus at age 67. And then it comes back to, if you're in a pension, if maybe in my age group of athletic trainers that some are in a state pension, maybe they have state health retirement benefits, right? Well, that offsets some things because your biggest expenses towards later in life are health expenses and that. or not? Or do we have to set aside for that, right? So, but here's the thing. Also, what other investments you have. So if you're in 401ks, right? You can't start making withdrawals from them until a certain age, which keeps changing with the federal, without penalty. And so it looks like a lot of money, but you want to retire at 55 because you have that money there, but you can't touch it because you're going to have a penalty for early withdrawal on a 401k, right? Because the government wants to get their money and they want it off that growth. So they want to tax you off that growth versus you withdrawing it early. So there's penalty plus taxes. So if your strategy, if you're like 30 now and you do want to retire early, you need to sit down with somebody and say that, because there's something getting broader, making it more, called bridge accounts, right? What's going to allow you to have income and insurance and other things during that time? Because you can purchase a health insurance. A lot of people forget that, right?
Yeah.
You can have your own health insurance that you pay, but you're going to have something to pay for that if you step down. And then what are you doing for income when you can't tap your retirement accounts? Or I want to plan for that. So that's where a Roth comes in. Remember, I said you can pull from the principal without penalty. Plus, there's not taxes on it.
Okay.
So the strategy I build with working with the planner after I've got my budget under control and stuff, the investment vehicles I choose based on what I have available to me is also going to be based on what my goal is. But that takes planning.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why it's called financial planning.
It's a lifelong thing you have to do. It's not a one and done thing.
No, it's not. And it takes time. And your goals and dreams may change. And that's okay too. But got to start somewhere.
Definitely. So with inflation, is there any way to try to prepare for the change in cost of certain goods or to be able to do things?
So that's what the whole concept of investing is for retirement, right? So when you select within those fences are things that grow money. And most of us have heard of stocks, bonds, right? But there's also these things called mutual funds. And then newer on the market, I know some younger people will be hearing about exchange traded funds, and they'll be told, oh, it's like a mutual fund. And it is. The key is, as you invest, and you can invest in growth stock, mutual funds, you can invest in bond funds, but each of these has different rates of return, right? And the average, any 10-year rolling period of the stock market, if you go to Morningstar or others and run it, it averages about 11% rate of return, any 10-year rolling period. Now, the problem is everybody looks at the headline news, right? Stocks are going down. Like recently, everybody's talking about how their 401k is now a 201k or whatever because of recent tariff things. But that's short term.
Yeah.
If you look at any of the what's called black swan events across the stock market, and you can Google black swan events and you'll see charts. It'll talk about the housing crisis in 2008. It'll talk about 9/11. It'll talk about COVID. COVID, stock market dropped like 20%, but then went on a 12, 14-month straight raging bull run. Here's the thing. When you look at those charts, the entire trajectory of the stock market, despite all the dips, is up. So you want a good return on your investment. And you can average, here's the key. I'm not saying you're going to get month in, month out, but you can average across the lifetime. You're looking for, some of your investments should be getting 12, 14% rate of return across the long term. I'm not talking about instantly. Now, a lot of financial planners will say, well, you should plan for 8% or 7% growth, because you at least have to get that. And but a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to invest in the stock market or in the bond market. Well, that's where mutual funds make it more secure. You're more diversified. Individual stocks and bonds are definitely not good, but they're a low rate of return. And since inflation is averaging about 3.5% a year, if you're only earning 6% on your money, you're getting 3.5% above inflation as an index. And does that really translate to cost of living? Probably not. So most advisors are going to tell you want to shoot for about 8%. Individually, you're really looking for that long term. So when you look at a fund, an S&P index fund, a Vanguard fund, you need to have diversification. You don't want everything in your international and tech stocks that are going like a roller coaster. You don't want everything in growth funds. You do want to have some in these slower, moderate funds as well. So you spread 25% of your entire investment portfolio across those funds. And an investment advisor can help you based on your risk tolerance too. But most people get very, very conservative. And when you're young, you definitely don't want to be. But even as you get older, people are like, oh, I want to shrink it down because I'm getting near retirement. I want to protect the money. But as if you read some of the current articles, since life expectancy has increased, right? A lot of the models were planned when they were conserving it for somebody who reaches 60 in retirement, living only about 10 years. And now people are living 20, 30 years, right? In their 80s, 90s. And how are you going to pay for all that?
Yeah.
So that's where you have to work through it and look at it and see where you end up. But you want to be getting good rates of return. And people say, you can't get 12%. You can't get, yes, you can. And if you look in the mutual funds, I've got ones that even with this downturn have a 7-year and 10-year track record of 12 and 13%. I'm not saying all of my portfolio is in those funds either. It's spread around, but you can do that. And you have to outperform inflation.
Yeah. So basically, aging fine wine has to have the proper conditions. You can't just set it out in the sun and, or just in a savings account. You need to go figure out which is the best way to have it age correctly for the best results.
Great way to analogize that with my time when I went to San Jose State, or as I say, now that I'm in Kentucky, how they aged the bourbon.
Yes.
The conditions it's aged in.
Man, I thought you were going to say Bitcoin was the best way to invest your money.
No. There's always going to be something new on the horizon, but it is amazing how, if you read The Turtle and the Hare, the ending's the same. Slow and steady wins the race, right?
Yep.
Always going to be new and fun things. But yeah, you got Bitcoin out there and
well, and I was just thinking about when you're cooking something in the oven, if you keep opening the door, it kind of ruins the whole experience. So just close the door and let it do its thing.
Which is why when you're working with an investment advisor, they'll talk about doing an annual checkup, right?
Yeah.
Once a year. Now, one thing you need to be firm on though is remember it's your money. And so they need to be listening to you and they need to be educating you why they're moving your money or putting it where they are. If you can't understand that, then you need to fire them and you need to get somebody, or if they're not willing to move money where you want it without a good explanation, then you need to fire them. Unfortunately, people get them and think, oh, they're working for me. And so sometimes the joke that goes around is your broker keeps you broker while they make money off of their payments. But seriously, and the other thing I think I know I added in your class is also, is this somebody that you want your partner, spouse, or a family member, brother, sister, sitting across who's going to help them understand where your finances are if something were to happen to you.
Yeah.
From a estate planning standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we have time to go into estate planning, but you should definitely have a plan.
At least get a will. If we say nothing
Yes.
else, have a will. Unless you absolutely hate everybody in your life, have a will and a living will.
And make sure it's not just you having a will, that you push your partner and whoever else you're living with to have one, so you know what to do and you're not stuck with the bill. Well, is there anything else we should slip in before we kind of wrap it up?
I mean, I don't think so. I think the basics, and sometimes this gets overwhelming. People hear all these numbers and letters and all of that. I think you have to start with getting a handle on a budget, and whether that's reading some books that are out there to help you. And by the way, even though I'm older and I've done handwritten budgets, I do mine on an app, right? There are apps out there from every dollar to YNAB. It's called You Need a Budget. So there are technological ways for all of you younger ones going, I need an app to look at it, that you can do this through. But you need to work on it in a systematic fashion. So if you need to find a certified financial planner, certified financial coach, you can do searches on the web, whatever. I know Dave Ramsey's site has a bunch of coaches, but if you're working, so there are two types of financial planners, CFPs, just so everybody knows. There's a fee-based, which is you pay a fee, which is how much coaches work. In our world, we hear about fitness coaches, right? Strength and conditioning, private. Financial coaches work that way. They're fee-based. So they're going to give you advice and not make any money off of whatever investments you make. A CFP, a certified financial planner, which has licenses and stuff to be able to sell if they want. Two types. Fee-based means you pay them a fee. You might pay them $400 or $500, and they're going to sit down with you and work through your budget and make recommendations. They'll even recommend what you should be doing with your employer retirement system. And then so that's just a straight up, you're going to pay a flat fee. The other one is where they're actually going to make a commission, right? So the commission based is, okay, well, I'll tell you what you need in your employer, but you're going to set up your Roth or your IRA with me. Just know up front and find out what the fee structure is, what percent of your investments and how that works for payment. Because it seems small, and they'll say something like 1%, 1.8, but 1.8% as your investment grows is a lot of money. So just be aware that there are different ways out there, but it does come down to getting on a budget, stop going into debt. Because if you don't do those two things, you're not going to have money. Because I always love the people who are like, when I tell people, well, save up and pay cash for a car, and they go, well, I can't do that. I'm like, well, you found a way to go get a 300, or the average car payment now I think is about $500 a month. You found a way to pay $500 a month to get a car. So while your car is paid off and it's not the nice, newest and shiny, and then you get fever and say, like some of your younger ones who are just getting their first job or whatever, I got this, no. Figure out that car that you want and the payment and start putting that away now. And in 4 or 5 years, right? If you put that much away a month into a high yield savings account because it's short term, we're not investing it. You're going to have enough money to go buy a car for cash. Now, it may not be the brand new car, but you'll have it. And so learning that contentment and understanding strategies and educating yourself. So
it was definitely eye-opening doing my budget as homework and all the extraneous costs that I would, memberships, subscriptions. You really lose track of it because it's on auto payment and they don't send you a receipt every time they charge you. So always checking to see, you know, if you are using a credit card or a debit card, it's, you know, it gets out of hand really fast and you're just paying for stuff that you're not even using.
And it's small dollars
Mm-hmm.
that add up. And
Yeah.
that's the other thing I tell people, it's your budget, put on there what you want. You know, if
Yeah.
it's somebody like in Kentucky, when we would meet with clients, some people have these big bourbon collections and they're going to spend X hundreds of dollars. I've had people who are smokers, right? They smoke.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is whatever it is, and again, yeah, you bring up streaming apps, which I see with a lot of younger clients. But if you look at your budget each month and go, I really, really want to knock that debt out, or I really want to be saving in retirement, seeing it, what it lays out, eventually you may change your desires and you will change the budget.
Yeah.
So out of sight, out of mind, you're not changing anything. In front of you, oh no, I can probably change this or that so I can do this, including so I can go on the vacation I want. I want to go travel Europe. I want to go to Australia for younger people, right?
Yeah.
Hey, if I drop 3 streaming services and this, you know,
I can listen to
only do
commercials on
2
Spotify.
Starbucks a week,
Yeah.
I can save a bunch of money and have the money for this trip in no time.
Yeah.
But if you can't see it, you don't know.
Yep. That's why I was saying those little treat me moments get hidden under the carpet real quick.
So to me, the key to financial success is doing a written budget every month, which I could show anybody all of my budgets all the way back to when we first started it in 99, 2000-ish. And I still have, I think I showed it in one of the lectures in class, the original first budget we did where, and for those that are on here, I was a grad student doing Division I football as a GA working on my doctorate. So it literally had things like recycled cans and funnels that we got money for in that budget. So
yeah. And start selling the weird things in your apartment that you don't use. You can make a lot of money off that real quick to get some debt down.
Yes, you can, right? And you can always pick up a side hustle. There's a lot of money now to be made in PRNAT if you're in the right area. As an athletic trainer, there's also your whole Uber and Lyft or DoorDash if you don't want to deal with people. I mean, there are lots of other ways that are flexible if you need that initial jolt of income to kind of get you free of some things. But
or if you're at a research institution like Caltech where I was at, they were paying people to do research or to be research subjects, which was like $100 for an hour. So look across campus for those opportunities and or even other campuses if they need it.
Exactly. So that whole idea of having a second job or a side hustle, a legitimate one that's going to, generate is definitely something that you can look at. And there is, if you're in the right areas, I've seen people, I know of 2 ATs in 2 areas that are full-time just doing PRN because of the amount of, that's not everywhere, but pretty much even here in rural Kentucky, there's Go for Ellis and there's events posted all the time. So you can pick up some.
Exactly. So, well, thank you so much. I think we addressed some of the myths.
Well,
getting some athletic trainers into a good state of mind and more comfortable living.
And they can always reach out to you. They can reach out to me if they want some books, names of books and things to read. But or they don't like to read. There are Audible books. Most of these are audiobooks. I don't like to read. I know I'm a professor, but I tend to listen to audiobooks when I run. So there's information out there if you want to get it. You don't just have to take a course.
And Dave Ramsey has some great podcasts if you just want to start dabbling in it and listening to what he has to say. So those are great resources.
And he's got different personalities. too.
Yep.
He's got himself, but then he's got his daughter Rachel. If you want that, he's got younger people that do different podcasts. So find one you like, start following it.
Yep, exactly. Well, thank you so much, and I hope to have you on again, and we can talk about estate planning. Woo!
All right. Sounds like a great topic. But thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. So,
yeah, no problem. Have a great night.
You too.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It is hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.